Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait a few more minutes, let some people join. My name is Evan.
I'm Victoria.
And we are here on Angel Island, ready to tell you about some plants and animals here. Looks like we got a lot of people joining. We've got over 100 people logged in, probably from around California, maybe from around the world. But this is California Biodiversity Week. So thanks for joining. Like I said, we'll give you a few more minutes to start. Still a little bit before 10. It's a beautiful day here on Angel Island. A minute ago, we had a hawk screaming outside the window, but it's gotten quiet now. So we're just gonna, like I said, wait a few minutes. Wondering if any of you have been to Angel Island. I hope some of you have. If you haven't, maybe you'll get excited learning about it and come out and visit us some other time. Because this is a webinar, it's called a PORTScast. Means you're not going to be able to talk to us, but you can put questions in. We'll check those questions occasionally, try to answer them when we can. And a few more minutes if you're just joining us. Glad you could be here. Give us a few more minutes and we'll start once we know we've hit 10 o'clock and we've got everybody on. And I'm seeing lots of hearts, thumbs up, clapping. Thank you all. It's nice to get that reminder you're there since we can't see your faces. It looks like it's just about 10 o'clock. We've got a few more people joining still, so we're going to wait a few more minutes before we start telling you more about those weird and wonderful plants and animals here on Angel Island. Let me move out of the way because Victoria keeps disappearing. There we go.
Over here.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again to folks for joining. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. My name is Evan.
I'm Victoria.
And we are here on Angel Island at Angel Island State Park, celebrating California Biodiversity Week.
Woo.
All right, and what is biodiversity? Bio means life. And diversity means lots of different kinds. So biodiversity is lots of life. And that's what we've got here on Angel Island. And a lot of the life here depends on the other animals or plants to survive. So biodiversity is really important. We're going to tell you about maybe 8 or 10 different plants and animals here and how they relate to each other, how the different species rely on each other and need that diversity. Throughout this time, you can put questions in down by clicking Q&A. We'll take a few breaks along the way, answer any questions, try to keep an eye on that. And we will also be keeping an eye on all those thumbs up and happy faces. So thank you for giving us those. So we know someone's out there enjoying this. I'm going to start now by giving you a little bit of history of the island, showing you where we are, telling you some of the history here before we turn to all the plants and animals that currently live on the island. So here we are in the San Francisco Bay, we're in the California, along the coast, and it's an island in the bay. So you can see San Francisco around us. Whoops, that way is San Francisco. But if you look up, there's that island, and that's Angel Island. And you can tell from this photo from up in the sky that the island has different habitats. There are a lot of trees on one side, more small bushes on the other, and that's because of the different wind and fog that comes in. And there's really diverse life here, but it's also a really recent island. It's been an island for about 11,000 years. So it's recent enough, and it used to be connected to San Francisco and Oakland and a lot of the land around it. So animals and plants would come and go just across the land. And that way, the diversity here is pretty similar to what you would see in San Francisco or Marin County or Oakland or Berkeley, the areas around here. But there's some things that are pretty specific to the island because the sea level rose and it is an island. Um, and almost the entire time it's been an island, there have been people here. So for about 8,000 years, probably, the Coast Miwok Native Americans lived here. Coast Miwok are a group that live in the Bay Area. They're in Marin County, other areas around. And they were here on the island for thousands of years, fishing, hunting, and also changing the landscape around them. They were probably using controlled burns to clear out areas, make room for new plants to grow in different ways, using those plants to make baskets and to make boats to go back and forth from the island to the mainland. Much more recently, the Spanish came here. They removed the Native Americans from the island. And then the Spanish turned it over to the Mexican government. There were ranches here. And then it became part of the US. As part of the US, there were military bases here. There was an immigration station. So about 100 years ago, immigrants who were trying to get to the US, if they weren't being allowed in, they would be detained here on Angel Island. There was also a quarantine station, and then it became a state park in the 1960s. And the state was trying to bring back a lot of the nature. So they replanted trees that the military had torn out, brought in more of the natural resources, put in hiking trails and campsites. So it's a great place to come visit and see some of this diversity here. And there are beautiful views. And one thing you'll notice, both these pictures are taken with oak trees in them because there was a lot of oak trees here. The oak woodlands are one of the main habitats that we have here on Angel Island. So I'm going to turn it over now to Victoria. She's going to tell you some more about those oak trees and how other species depend on them, and they depend on the diversity as well.
Hey, thanks for that amazing intro, Evan. So we do have a lot of oaks here on the island. That's probably the species of plant that you'll see the most on Angel Island. As Evan mentioned, we do have oak woodland, and as the name implies, oaks are very important and abundant species in that ecosystem. We do have two different species of oak on Angel Island. We have the coast live oak and we have a species of scrub oak. They do look pretty similar and they kind of fill the same role in the ecosystem. But as we'll learn later, it is important to have more than just one species of oak. As you can see in that picture way over there, we have some acorns. I just took these pictures like maybe 2 days ago. So this is kind of how the acorns are looking at this time of year. They're still growing. That brown part at the top is kind of like the little acorn hat. And then the green part is the actual seed that'll get bigger over time and then turn brown and eventually, fall off the tree. And that's the part that a lot of animals eat. Oaks are very, important food source for a lot of animals here, and even for, some of the people, like Evan mentioned, the Coast Miwok were here for a long time. And they also use the oaks in their day-to-day lives. So, yeah, as you can see, the oaks have these the oaks that we have here have these really nice, big, shiny leaves that from this picture right above me, you can see they're kind of like convex, or they, kind of fold out. And they can have some little spikes on them. And yeah, you cannot come to Angel Island without seeing an oak. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you something about a species that you're probably least likely to see on the island, and that is the Angel Island mole. So the Angel Island mole is endemic to the island. So endemic means that you can only find the species here. So this mole is only found on the island. You can't find it anywhere else on the planet. Before Angel Island was an island, the moles were the same species. They could travel back and forth. Once Angel Island sea levels rose and became an island, the moles that were here kind of got stuck on the island. So they were able to kind of evolve slightly differently than their mainland counterparts. And I actually have a mole right here that's been taxidermied, so you can get a sense of how big they are. They're a little different than their mainland counterparts because they're a little bit bigger. They have a little bit darker fur and their paws are a little bigger. So you can see they have pretty big feet. It's about the size of my fingertip. So the reason you're least likely to see these on Angel Island is because they spend a majority of their life underground. They eat mostly insects. And as you can see, especially in that picture, how big their hands are, and they use them a lot for digging. The only time people really see moles on the island is if they're unfortunately dead, because they do spend all of their life underground. They do have a little tail. If you can see, they have a little tail that has little hair on it, and that can help them sense if there's anything behind them. They have really soft fur that helps them kind of glide through the soil and the dirt while they're digging. And yeah, I mean, you can even see from the picture that they don't really have any very obvious eyes, since they don't really need them since they're underground all the time. But that's a super unique species specific to Angel Island. So what's something that might eat an Angel Island mole? That would be a coyote. So we do have coyotes on the island. We didn't always have them. One actually swam over by itself from Tiburon. It was about a mile swim. We did not introduce them at all. They totally did it naturally by themselves. They came to the island, and it's actually a very welcome species here. They've helped a lot with kind of controlling other populations of animals that are on the island, because until this point, we really didn't have a predator species on the island. We didn't have any, mountain lions, bobcats, foxes, anything like that. So certain species were getting really out of control, like the deer and the raccoons. So now that coyotes are on the island, they're able to kind of help control those populations. Like I said, they've only been here since about 2017, so they're still pretty recent. They haven't even been here for a decade. And that's another thing too, is coyotes are they're very generalist species. So that means they don't need very specific things in order to live. They don't need a specific food source or a specific habitat. As you can see in the picture over here, there's one in front of a trash can, and they can kind of eat whatever they can get their hands on, their mouths on, I guess. And luckily, since they're still a new recent addition, we try to encourage people not to feed coyotes. The coyotes are still afraid of people, which is a good thing. We want to not feed the coyotes. We want them to not be comfortable around people. That's how we get animals that become aggressive. And that's what happened with the raccoons. Was raccoons didn't have a predator, and people started feeding them, and they got very comfortable around people, and it became a huge issue.
All right.
Yeah.
Actually, we have a lot of questions about the moles.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So let me ask you a few of these.
Back to the moles.
First, how big are they?
Yeah, so you can see this mole here. It's probably about the size of my hand. Yeah, about the size of my hand.
And does the fur ever cover the eyes?
Yeah, I guess since they don't really have, I don't know. I don't know if they have eyes. If they do have eyes, they're very small and they have very poor vision. So I'm sure the fur does cover their eyes since they don't really need to use them. They mostly go by feel.
Wow, so cool.
That is cool.
And then someone pointed out that they thought most island mammals got smaller when they evolved. Do we know why the mole got bigger?
Yeah, so actually that is a really cool thing that happens on islands, is that big animals tend to get smaller, but small animals tend to get bigger. So moles are usually pretty small, so this one did get a little bit bigger, as opposed to the mainland ones. So other species that might be here, say like, I don't know, deer or some other bigger animals, they might over time get a little bit smaller. And that's just because, they get smaller because they don't need to be physically big and compete as much with other animals, since there's a limited population on the island. And sometimes smaller animals get bigger in order to do things like fill something like a predator role. So you may have a small bird that slowly over time gets bigger so they can eat bigger things and be a predator.
And speaking of predators, a couple questions about the coyotes, and
Okay.
then we'll move on.
Yeah.
So are they dangerous? And how big are they?
Yeah, so coyotes, I'd say they're about the size of a large dog. I mean, you have the trash cans there in the picture for size comparison. That one is maybe a little small, but I'd say that's roughly the size of how they are. They're not huge like wolves or anything. Coyotes they can be dangerous. Again, if a coyote has been around people a lot and they get comfortable around people and people start feeding them and they start to see people as a source of food, then they can become aggressive. And instead of waiting for food to be given to them, they start wanting to take it for themselves. But if we keep that barrier between us and the coyotes and we don't feed them and we try to keep them as natural as possible, there's not really much to worry about because they won't see us as any sort of food or any sort of, they won't be comfortable around us. And, the ones that we have here, usually we see them and they run off as soon as we see them. So, and that's why we want to keep it. Yeah, so that's a good question. Any other ones before we go on?
A lot of good questions. I don't think we have time to answer them all now. Let's keep going and then we'll come back. We'll still keep an eye on questions and see how many more we can get to.
All right. Well, I'm going to pass it back off to Evan, and he's going to talk about one of my favorite birds that fills in another role on the island that's very important.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to me. I want to talk about a bird that, like the coyote, eats other animals. But this bird, one of the most common birds here on Angel Island, you see it often, it's also one of the biggest, is a turkey vulture. And it will only eat animals that are already dead, which sounds pretty gross, but it means they're cleaning up the dead animals off the island. So turkey vultures will soar above the island. You'll see them commonly throughout California and many other places as well. They tend to soar high, so they look maybe like a hawk or an eagle. They almost never flap their wings. They have a bit of a V when they fly, and they just shake back and forth. They wobble, and they do that so they can ride on the air currents without having to flap their wings, preserve a lot of energy. And then they've got a great nose. So if they smell a dead animal, carrion is what we call dead animals, they'll then come down and eat it. And here we have a photo of one eating a dead fish. So instead of having a lot of dead animals laying around on the island, other places, turkey vultures help clean those off. But if you think about dead animals, often they have bacteria on them. They're rotting, or maybe the animal died from some sort of disease. How does the turkey vulture keep from getting sick when it eats those? Well, it's got a really cool technique. And what it does is it excretes on the dead animal. So that's peeing or pooping on its food. But instead of making it dirtier, it actually helps clean it. It's got a lot of acid. And when it excretes on the dead animal, it'll kill the bacteria, kill any disease. And that way it can eat it without getting sick. And again, it's helping clean up the island for all of us. And then also Victoria's favorite fact about these animals, turkey vultures, if they get scared, like this one here eating the fish, when I took that photo, I stayed back pretty far, but I took the photo through my binoculars, like a telephoto lens. If I had come too close to it and it got scared, it might have vomited, because that's what they do. They will barf when they're scared or threatened, and the smell of it is so bad, it'll get the predators to leave. So that's a really weird, but pretty special defense technique they have, so they can survive around other species and keep those other animals away from them. All right, so those are all my gross facts about turkey vultures. I'm going to show you another bird now that's a lot cuter. And that's pointing that way, the acorn woodpecker. They are all around the island. And like turkey vultures, they need dead things, but they don't eat dead animals. What they do is they need dead trees. So it's really important when we talk about biodiversity, it's not just the diversity of living things when they're alive, it's once they die. If you cleared out all the dead trees, if you cut them down, took them away, acorn woodpeckers couldn't survive. They need those standing dead trees, because they dig holes in them. They use their beaks and they peck at the wood and they make these big holes. That big hole in the photo in the middle there is one of their nests. So they can carve out a big hole, go into it. It can be up to 2 feet deep. It's where they'll sleep at night, and the entire family group will hang out together in a couple of trees. 10 to 15 birds that are all related, and they'll live there year round. And when it's time to nest, they'll work together and help raise the chicks together inside those trees. And then the other thing they do in dead trees, they poke holes and they store their favorite food. And if I'll take a second to think, what do you think the favorite food of an acorn woodpecker is? I'll bet you got it. It's acorns, right? So Victoria talked about acorns. We have a lot of oak trees, and they have those acorns that all fall off in the fall. So the acorn woodpeckers will go around, they'll gather acorns, they'll dig holes in trees, and they'll store the acorns in the tree. So now they've got food source for the next year. They can keep coming back and eating the acorns that they or other members of their family have hidden in trees this way. But what if you have a year when acorns aren't producing, when an oak tree, one species of oak, doesn't drop a lot of acorns? Acorn woodpeckers will only live in places that have at least 2 species of oak trees. So if it's a bad year for one species, they'll get a lot of acorns from another species. And that way they survive off the diversity of oak trees. They save those acorns living in dead trees. They could be dead oaks or other types of trees too. I believe this one here is a Monterey pine. So they will live in those trees and store their acorns. All right, let me show you another animal now. It is totally reliant on one type of plant, and that's the pipevine swallowtail butterfly. So you see this really beautiful butterfly here that relies on one type of plant. So they will only lay their eggs on the pipevine plant. So it's called the Dutchman's pipevine or the California pipevine. You can find those here on Angel Island. They're pretty hard to see, but when they bloom, they have that really cool, weird looking flower. And the butterfly lays their eggs on that plant because when the egg hatches, it becomes a caterpillar. So you get this caterpillar here that can only eat one type of leaf, and that's the leaf of the California pipevine plant. So it's a species that relies completely on one plant. They'll eat those leaves, and not many other animals will eat those leaves because they're poisonous. But the caterpillar can handle the poison. And in fact, the poison builds up within the caterpillar. It doesn't hurt the caterpillar, but once it's eaten that leaf, birds can't eat the caterpillar. If a bird ate the caterpillar, they'd get sick. So the caterpillar stays safe, keeps eating those leaves until it grows big and strong, and then it wraps up into a cocoon, and that cocoon turns into a butterfly again and starts that life cycle. So the butterfly needs the plant.
We have some good questions too.
Sounds like there's some good questions.
We got some good questions.
Okay, let's do that now before I tell you a little more about the plant also.
Yeah.
What do we got?
So back to the turkey vulture. Do they ever kill and eat animals?
Turkey vultures almost never kill an animal. There have been a few known cases, but they almost only eat animals that are already dead.
All right, and then why can't acorn woodpeckers make their holes in trees that are alive?
Sometimes they do, but it's really hard. If you think about the wood of a tree that's alive, there's a lot of moisture in it. It's strong. It's got really thick, strong bark. A dead tree is usually softer in the inside. It's started to rot. There might be insects in it, so it's easier to poke holes in it. And then they can eat some of the insects while they're digging.
Great. They also want to know how big the turkey vulture and the acorn woodpecker are.
All right, let's go back. So a turkey vulture, that wingspan, they stretch out their wings, can be about 6 or 7 feet. And the body is about this big. An acorn woodpecker is pretty cute little, maybe this big. So 6 to 8 inches tall, I think. So very different sized birds. If you find a feather of one, it becomes really clear. If you ever find feathers, the first thing you should notice, not even as much as the color, but the size. I found turkey vulture feathers that are larger than an entire acorn woodpecker. So you know it comes from a big bird. Any other questions? Should we move on?
I think that's good for now. Yeah.
Okay. So good questions. Thank you all. Back to the pipe vine. We've got that butterfly that relies on the plant. Couldn't survive without that specific plant. But that plant also needs other insects. So the plant can't survive without insects to pollinate it. And the way it attracts pollinators, many plants have really beautiful flowers that smell sweet, and they'll attract birds or insects that want to drink their nectar. But the pipe vine is really different. This flower smells like dead animals. So instead of attracting birds, it attracts flies. The flies that would eat a dead animal that might land on some of the same animals a turkey vulture would be eating, those flies will fly inside this flower here. And once they fly inside, if you look up here, what happens? It closes its mouth and catches the insect inside. That fly will fly around and get some pollen on it. And then the mouth will open back up of the flower, the fly flies out, and then it gets attracted to another similar flower and spreads the pollen. And that's how the plants can then reproduce. So just like the insect butterfly needs a certain type of plant, this plant needs certain types of insects to help pollinate it. So really cool interdependence between those species. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Victoria now, who's going to talk about our last plant on the, well, not the last one on the island, but the last one we're going to talk about. Then we'll be able to turn to some more questions before we wrap up.
Hello again. So the last plant we're going to talk about today is a paintbrush. So you can kind of see it gets its name because it might look like a paintbrush that maybe has some red paint on the end of it. And a really cool thing about these plants is that they are hemiparasitic. So that means they're parasitic. So the hemi part means like partly, and then they're parasitic. So the green part of the plant, kind of down here toward the bottom, that's the part that can photosynthesize. It can make its own nutrients for itself. But what it also does is it can attach itself to the root systems of other plants, and it can steal the nutrients from other plants. So that's why it's hemiparasitic, because it can produce its own nutrients, but it also steals some from other plants. Yeah, usually when you hear the word parasitic, you usually think of, maybe like a tick or a flea or some sort of parasitic worm in an animal. But plants can be parasites too, and paintbrush is definitely not the only one. There are some plants that are totally parasitic. They cannot photosynthesize for themselves, and they have absolutely no green in them. The paintbrush is native to the island and native to chaparral kind of ecosystems. And you may think that parasites are a bad thing, but they're actually a very necessary part of different communities and ecosystems. So because this plant is taking nutrients from another plant, that means that plant can't do its absolute best in growing and making flowers and doing all its necessary plant things, so that it makes it essentially a little bit weaker. And so other plants are able to come in and grow when they maybe wouldn't be able to before. So it helps competition in certain ecosystems. And it's parasites can be kind of the checks and balances in an ecosystem. Yeah, so this can, there's other plants too, like another one that you may have heard of, but maybe you didn't realize was parasitic is mistletoe. So mistletoe, you usually see around Christmas and everything, but those are also parasites. They usually parasitize trees. So yeah, while everything does kind of have while parasites aren't totally bad things in the ecosystem, they're totally necessary. and they definitely have their place in the ecosystem, and they're not bad.
So the paintbrush, we've got some questions about
Okay,
paintbrush.
great.
So where did it get its name from? And did people actually use it as a paintbrush?
I don't think people have actually used it as a paintbrush, to my knowledge at least. There could be some random person that's tried out there, but I don't think that was a common thing to do. I think that a lot of times when scientists are naming different plants or animals, they do what's easiest and just name it after what it kind of looks like. So it just looks like you're holding up a paintbrush and it's got red paint on the tip of it, which I think is fairly accurate.
Cool.
That's a good question.
Do you know if animals or people ever eat the paintbrush?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm not sure if they eat them. I'm sure there's animals that eat the paintbrush. They're not, because they're parasitic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're poisonous. So I think other animals could eat them. The parasitic part just means that they can't produce all of their nutrients for themselves. So they have to take it from another plant.
And where can it be found?
So they're usually found in chaparral ecosystems, and in kind of those, where there's a lot of like oak and toyon and California sagebrush and kind of those scrubby brush areas. They usually like to parasitize. California buckwheat is a popular one they will be with, and that's found a lot in chaparral ecosystems.
So is it common throughout California?
Yeah, kind of in those, I'd say probably in kind of these more coastal and southern areas. I don't think you're going to see as many of these up in like the redwoods or more areas like that. I think they're usually in more chaparral ecosystems. There might be other species of paintbrush because there's multiple species. There might be another species of paintbrush that might parasitize a different plant, but this one is usually in chaparral ecosystems. Good question.
Cool. Someone asked a question that I don't know the answer to, but maybe you do. Are there any turtles on Angel Island?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, are there turtles in the bay?
We rarely see them in the bay.
Yeah.
But if there were any on land here, we don't have a lot of standing water.
No. Yeah, we do have a few beaches on the island, but they are pretty short. They're pretty small sections of beach. A lot of the island just kind of has rocky cliffs that go straight into the water. So we don't have a ton of beaches, and the ones we have are pretty small and people usually visit them. So I don't think it would be an optimal place for a turtle to hang out or lay eggs.
Yeah. And then there's a question, are there any invasive animal species on the island?
Ooh.
And that I can think of a few.
Yeah.
Some of the birds here,
That's what I was thinking.
European starlings. Move in also, you can see it. European starlings are a really common bird all across the United States now. They were introduced about 150 years ago from Europe to the United States, and they've kind of taken over in a lot of areas. And they like to live in dead trees, just like acorn woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are big enough and strong enough, they're probably not going to have trouble with the starling. But starlings often take over the nest holes of Western bluebirds, and they've really reduced the population of bluebirds because of that. More recently, though, a lot of people are doing better at leaving dead trees up, so there's enough space to go around. So here on Angel Island, we have pretty many starlings. I think there's a flock of about 40 that we typically see on one side of the island. But we also have a lot of Western bluebirds. They're doing really well because we have a lot of trees that have been left in the natural way. When they die, they're allowed to decay. Woodpeckers, typically the ones who will make those holes, they dig inside. Someone had asked, do they actually dig the hole all the way inside? And the answer is yes. So sometimes the trees are a little bit hollow, but mostly the woodpeckers are digging that hole out. But as soon as the woodpecker leaves, a bluebird could move in, or a starling, or a nuthatch. There are a lot of different birds that will reuse those holes. We also have owls on the island. Sometimes they'll live in the holes in trees, either natural holes or ones that have been dug by a woodpecker. We have lots of different kinds of woodpeckers. acorn woodpeckers, nuttals, hairy woodpeckers, and downy woodpeckers. And these are all woodpeckers that are common throughout the Bay Area and much of California. More common than what you would think. So listen up when you're in your neighborhood or taking a hike somewhere. If you hear some pecking on a tree, it could be a woodpecker.
Yeah, and that's another thing with invasive animals is that you notice that one of the examples that Evan had was a bird, because you have to remember this is an island. So if an animal's going to come here, it either has to swim or fly or get in on a boat somehow. Other animals, if they are, say if there's like a mole or something that can't really swim or fly or do any of that, they have no chance of coming here unless somebody physically brings them here. I can think of a lot more invasive plants just because of all the different uses this island has had over the years. And people have lived here and had gardens and they planted really pretty plants that are not from the Bay Area or even California or even the United States. And those plants, when they come here, they don't have anything that eats them or have any competition. They might outcompete the natural plants that are here. And they kind of get out of control and can easily get out of people's gardens and take over the island.
Yeah, and speaking of that, that reminds me, we have one more species that's really common here on Angel Island.
What?
So let's all think about it. This species has been on the island for about 8,000 years, probably, has impacted a lot of the other species here for thousands and thousands of years. It's a species that changed the island, but also stewarded it, helped keep things in a natural balance. The last couple of hundred years, this species has done a lot more things that feel invasive, that have gotten rid of other species, but has also brought in others. So who do you think I'm talking about? Is it a type of bird? Is it a reptile? Is it a plant? It's a mammal. It's got hair, it's got 2 arms and 2 legs, it's humans. So there are a lot of humans here, part of the biodiversity on Angel Island, throughout California and throughout the world are humans, us. So it's important to think about how we fit in with other plants and animals. We are part of the diversity. We bring new things to new places, we move things, we can clear paths so other people can hike. We can cut down trees to make space for other plants to grow, or we can cut down so many trees that nothing grows in its place. So it's important to think about how we interact with the environment. Think about you when you're out walking your neighborhood. Are you leaving trash behind or are you helping clean up trash? Think about what you're planting if you have a yard. Are you planting things that are going to help the native plants and animals? Or are you planting things that might not fit in? There are a lot of, if you ever are, I saw someone asked a question, how can we plant native plants? Really good question. Check it out, Google around, go to a nursery that offers native plants wherever you are. I've seen things advertised as wildflower packets, native wildflowers, but they don't say where they're native to. That's no good. What you need to do is find out what's local. Talk to a local nursery, do a little research online. They'll have all kinds of advice for things that grow locally. And when you plant native plants, let's say a pipe vine, you could be planting habitat for that next pipe vine swallowtail butterfly. So that's how we help take care of the planet around us, locally and globally, and keep it beautiful for people for generations to come.
Yeah, you gotta remember too, like all the animals and plants we talked about. I mean, our presentation is called The Weird and Wonderful, on Angel Island. So even though some of these animals may not be conventionally cute, like the turkey vulture, or may seem scary because they're parasitic, everything has its place in the ecosystem and everything is important. And just because it may not be, cute or something that you want doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve to live or doesn't deserve its place in the ecosystem. And everything has its role and deserves to be here.
Yeah, so no more stepping on bugs.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Got our information over there. If you
Yeah.
want to reach out, come visit, we would love to see you here. Only way to get here is by boat. You can
Yep.
take a ferry from San Francisco or from Tiburon. Come hike around the island. There are a couple of camp spots. And you can also tour some of the historical places. You can tour the immigration station, learn about immigration here. You can look at some of the military history, or just come and enjoy all these beautiful, weird, and wonderful plants and animals. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Take care. Enjoy the last few days of California Biodiversity Week. Bye all.
Bye.